Is the U.S. military going woke? The Secretary of Defense denies it, but the evidence says otherwise. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to be the first to watch new episodes every week. So on April 1st, we published an episode titled, U.S. Military Goes Woke Against Extremism. In that episode, we saw a new narrative emerging. After the January 6th Stop the Steal rally in Washington, D.C., some people had concerns about a growing threat of white supremacist terrorism in the United States. That doesn't make a lot of sense unless you understand that to some people, what happened on January 6th was pretty much all about white supremacy. It was definitely not about specific concerns over election fraud or people saying Trump should have won the election. No, the protesters were all white supremacists. In the midst of this white supremacy scare, it was discovered that some of the people who were arrested on January 6th were veterans. Back in January, NPR said nearly 1 in 5 of the people arrested were veterans, although a more updated record now shows it's actually less than 1 in 7. Nearly a month later, on February 5th, the Secretary of Defense issued a memorandum where he instructed all U.S. military service branches to hold a one-day stand-down to address extremism in the military. In the document it said, "We will not tolerate actions that go against the fundamental principles of the oath we share, including actions associated with extremist or dissident ideologies." It's unclear how the military is defining the term dissident ideologies. This Department of Defense instruction says military personnel must not actively advocate supremacist or extremist ideology or causes, including those that advance, encourage, or advocate illegal discrimination based on race, creed, color, sex, religion, ethnicity, or national origin. And since some of the people who entered the Capitol on January 6th were veterans, that could indicate the entire U.S. military has a problem with white supremacist extremism in the ranks. The answer? Give everyone in the military a lecture about extremism in the military. Yeah, that'll solve everything. That's the narrative. But the thing is, the story doesn't end there. Because that narrative about white supremacist extremists in the military and the role they played on January 6th may be part of a broader shift in military culture, at least amongst the top brass. I'll give you some examples after the break. Welcome back. The U.S. military has had policies in place to deal with extremism in the military since at least 2009. That's not new. But the idea that the January 6th Stop the Steal rally was actually a white supremacist rally has led the U.S. military to crack down on extremism in the ranks. The first step was a service-wide stand-down to discuss extremism in the military. That included a call for military personnel to report fellow servicemen for extremist views. The second step? Show everyone the right way of thinking so they can identify extremist wrongthink with books about race. In late February, Republican members of Congress criticized the 2021 Naval Book List for including woke books, like Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. The book list is an old naval tradition and it's voluntary reading. But according to Brent Sadler, a former Navy officer, the book list is supposed to include readings on naval history and doctrine, not identity politics. In response to the release of the book list, 3 U.S. congresspeople wrote letters to Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Michael Gilday, asking him to remove 3 books, including Kendi's. Admiral Gilday responded. He said he supported Kendi's book. He also said that some of the books on the list were recommendations from Task Force 1 Navy, which he asked over the summer to identify and remove racial barriers, improve inclusion efforts, create new opportunities for professional development, and eliminate obstacles to enter the Navy. And Admiral Gilday actually stated that he included Kendi's book in the hopes that Navy personnel would learn to achieve self-reflection about understanding barriers to true inclusion, the deep nuances of racism and racial inequalities from Kendi. So Admiral Gilday is not claiming to be woke. He's just saying the message in the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is important for everyone. But after lecturing military personnel about extremism in the ranks and recommending anti-racist reading, the next step may include purging people with dissident ideologies. I'll cover that example after the break. Welcome back. The stand-down ordered for all military personnel in February involved an entire day of lectures about extremism in the military. Meanwhile, the Chief of Naval Operations released a book list that included anti-racist books. Together, the message seems to be that anybody who doesn't agree with people like Ibram X. Kendi could be an extremist. So what do you do with people who disagree? Well, you fire them, of course. On May 10th, Space Force Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeier self-published a book titled Irresistible Revolution: Marxism's Goal of Conquest and the Unmaking of the American Military. In the book, he discusses Marxist ideology, the history of critical race theory, the way that the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry is rooted in critical race theory, and how Marxist ideologies are being embedded in the U.S. Armed Forces. 2 days before his book was published, he went on the podcast Information Operation to talk about it. In the podcast, Lohmeier expressed concerns about politicization of the military.
When senior leaders begin to politicize the institution itself, that's not what the American people expect, and it's not our obligation. And the young service members come in and they're met with what I'll call a hyper-politicized work environment, where diversity and inclusion initiatives are being pushed constantly. We read a book called So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. Mm-hmm. There are suggestions in there about how the reader ought to be donating their free money, which politicians they ought to be supporting, which social justice initiatives they ought to be supporting, and the United States is referred to as a white supremacist nation all throughout the entire work.
I guess the Space Force is doing anti-racist readings too, just like the Navy. He also expressed concerns about different treatment based on partisan politics.
In recent American history, neo-Marxist thought has found a welcome home in the Democrat Party, I'll put it that way, or in left domestic politics. What you see happening in the U.S. military at the moment is that if you're a conservative, then you're lumped into a group of people who are labeled extremists, if you're willing to voice your views. And if you're aligned with the left, then it's okay to be an activist online because no one's going to hold you accountable.
In response to the podcast, Lohmeier's commanding officer rushed to hold Lohmeier accountable by relieving him of command on May 14th, citing loss of trust and confidence in his ability to lead. Which kind of proves Lohmeier's point. His commanding officer also started an investigation on whether these comments constituted prohibited partisan political activity. So, assigning a book with specific political recommendations, not prohibited partisan political activity. Participating in a BLM protest, not prohibited partisan political activity. Talking about the growing politicization of the military, prohibited partisan political activity. Lohmeier's case sparked reactions from a lot of people. These three members of Congress all expressed concern over increasing politicization in the Department of Defense and partisan attacks on conservative statements. Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin rebutted by saying extremism in the ranks is the real problem. And Chief Pentagon spokesman John Kirby defended Austin, saying there's no effort by senior Defense Department leadership to purge people from the service based on their political or religious beliefs. Austin is making decisions based on his sound judgment and years of experience in the military, and not through any kind of partisan or political lens. So conservatives are saying the problem is the military pushing leftist ideas and punishing people who express conservative views. Meanwhile, the military is saying, no, we're totally not doing that, we're just targeting extremism. But how does the military define extremism? That's an important question, since conservatives are accusing the military of targeting people on the right without addressing far-left extremism in the ranks. An advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff said soldiers sympathizing with Black Lives Matter are different from those who took part in the January 6th Capitol protest. In particular, he said, there were people advocating against social injustice, racial injustice, and everything else. And it is the right of citizens, if it is an organization that is actually imposing harm, threat, destruction, criminal activity, and so on, then we don't condone that behavior. To be fair, his statement sounds pretty reasonable. Citizens do have the constitutional right to advocate for their own views. The problem that many conservatives have with all of this is the double standard. Activism on the left is tolerated and even celebrated, but activism on the right is labeled extremism. So no one is disputing whether extremism should be rooted out of the military. The dispute is over what gets labeled as extremism. On May 29th, Representative Dan Crenshaw and Senator Tom Cotton decided to set up an online whistleblower forum just for active service members to report woke efforts in the military. And the reports started flowing in. From a Marine who said that a military history training session was replaced with training on white privilege and systemic racism, to a service member who said a unit was required to read Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, to an airman who said a unit was forced to participate in a privilege walk, where members of the wing were ordered to separate themselves by race and gender in order to stratify people based on their perceived privilege. One of Crenshaw's aides said the forum has received more than 300 credible complaints coming from various branches of the military. He spoke about it on Fox and Friends.
And there's things like white privilege walks. So take 2 steps forward if you're white, a step back if you're black. Tell me how that's inclusive. Tell me how that doesn't create divisions within our military.
Crenshaw isn't the only one asking those questions. During a June 23rd House Armed Services Committee budget hearing, one representative asked about Matt Lohmeier getting fired for his view on Marxism in the military. Here's how Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin responded.
We do not teach critical race theory. We don't embrace critical race theory, and I think that's a spurious conversation. And so we are focused on extremist behaviors, and not ideology, not people's thoughts, not people's political orientation. Behaviors is what we're focused on.
But was Lohmeier fired for behavior or for the things he said? Later, Representative Mike Waltz asked Austin about a letter he had received from the superintendent of West Point, informing him that critical race theory was being taught at West Point. That letter mentioned a class, some class materials, and a seminar on understanding whiteness and white rage, taught by a woman who wrote a book called White Rage and who equates the Republican Party with white supremacy. Austin didn't have much to say about it, but General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, did.
I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand. And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there.
And the internet exploded with questions. Is the military teaching critical race theory or isn't it? If so, is teaching critical race theory in the military a good thing or a bad thing? Does it enhance combat effectiveness or expedite mission completion? And did General Milley just attribute the January 6th riot to white rage? Austin seems to be saying one thing and Milley seems to be saying another. Meanwhile, active service members like Lohmeier and the 300 whistleblowers are saying yet another. The U.S. military is trying to be more inclusive, as you can see from this recent Army recruitment ad.
It begins in California, with a little girl raised by 2 moms. I also marched for equality. I like to think I've been defending freedom from an early age. I'm U.S. Army Corporal Emma Malone-Lord, and I answered my calling.
But some are worried that military leadership is using the language of inclusivity to exclude conservative viewpoints by labeling it white supremacy. With all of that, Only one thing is clear. The controversy over the U.S. military going woke isn't over. So what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is mainly supported by viewers like you. So please visit patreon.com/America Uncovered to learn how you can support us with as little as $1 per episode. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thank you for watching America Uncovered.